Mm-hmm. All right. So maybe we can start just by you introducing yourself in case there's someone who doesn't know you.
Mhm. My name is Keith Terry. I live in Oakland, California, in the United States, and I've been doing body music since the late 1970s.
Amazing. And not only doing body music, I would say, but also coining it and establishing it and disseminating to the world. So maybe just could we talk about a little bit of how it started, the incentive behind it, and how, in what ways you started working through it and with it?
Sure. Well, I'm a drummer, and it really came out of drumming for me. I was working a lot with dancers and a lot of tap dancers. Um, that generation, they've all passed on, but people like Gregory Hines, the Nicholas Brothers, Sam Ed Sims, Chuck Green, Eddie Brown, Steve Condos, Charles Honeycombs, Charles Cookie Cook, that generation. Um, and I was fortunate enough to be in the right place and time to accompany many of them with the drums. And I was so inspired by them that one day in a rehearsal, I had this thought that I could stand up and play everything I'd been playing on my drums onto my body. And that's how I made the transition to body musician. And at that time, there wasn't a really an official name for it that I knew of. I mean, I had heard of ham bone, traditional African American style that comes from the United States, and I was familiar with traditional styles, but just as a genre. Um, so started kicking around the idea of the term with my friend Paul Arslanian, another musician whom I was experimenting a lot with and showing him parts, and he was helping me by holding parts and kind of just helping me develop these ideas that I had. And Paul's was the one who suggested to me, why don't you call it body music? And I like it. And I went with that. That was 1978. And I liked it better than body drumming, body percussion, because for me, I like melody, I like harmony, I can use my voice. So it's a larger musical experience than just the percussive side. So that's why I decided to go with that name. And I started using it then, I coined the term, and then other people started using it, and it's still out there in the world today. Um, I've been always, attracted to those traditional styles of body musics around the world. They're the oldest music on the planet, probably. Before we were making musical instruments, we were probably doing those styles, and many of them have existed for centuries. Many of them are difficult to find. They're really embedded within culture. They're not created for performance. They serve other purposes. And so it was through my travels as a musician, a jazz musician, and working with dancers and stuff. It was through my travels that I was encountering these traditional body musicians in different parts of the world. And I was able to touch base with them often, sometimes collaborate, just exchange ideas. And I got to know this network. It became a network that really developed globally through my touring. And then I started having this fantasy of a festival that would bring together this style, that would feature this genre of music that had never been featured as a full festival. So in 2008, we produced the first International Body Music Festival, and that was in the Bay Area where I live, San Francisco, Oakland, California. And it was, we brought together, I think it was about 75 or 80 artists from maybe 10, 12 countries. And it was a mix of contemporary and traditional styles. And it became a thing. The festival became a thing. People loved it. We all loved being together, these practitioners that were coming from different parts of the world. Many of us felt like we had found our people. We no longer had to explain what it is we were doing. People just understood. And it was a great scene, both artistically and socially. People could hang out. There were a lot of parties. There was a lot of just people to people connection, not only the artistic, but it really grew, and the festival's still going strong. I knew from the beginning that if it continued on, I wanted the festival itself to be international, to not be tied to a specific place like the United States or the Bay Area. I didn't want people to have to travel to the US just to experience this. So started developing this way of moving it around the world. And so we've ended up producing the festival with producing partners in Brazil and in Turkey, in Greece, in Italy, in Bali, Indonesia, in Ghana. We've moved it around, and it continues to move around. And the community grows more and more and expands bigger and bigger. There are other body music festivals happening now in the world as I see the genre just kind of spreading and growing.
Amazing. I think you're touching upon like this thread of this global element. Like on the one hand, you doing this mapping and this research on what already existed
Mhm.
traditionally, and then
Mhm.
also using the same method of disseminating and bringing people together again in a global kind of mapping of around the world. And
Yeah,
it seems like this kind of brings something out there of the common, we have obviously have something in common that connects us through these practices that surpasses, geographies and countries and cultures and languages.
right. There's also an element that I feel like is really important to mention, just how that network developed, kind of the model that I used to do this, um, because it succeeded beyond my wildest imagination. Um, it was a very organic thing. We had the first ones, with our friends in Turkey, our friends in Brazil. Those were kind of the first festivals that we produced, outside where we live, um, here in the Bay Area. Um, and it really it was a very social thing that happened. I mean, we met. I'm just thinking about the two groups, Kekacha in Turkey and Barbatuks in Brazil. We met through the festival. I had contacts with them, either sought them out or, we met through the internet or, like in the case with Kekacha, I knew Tugai and Timuchin through the Orff world. I was introduced through them to them through that. But we were artistic partners first. They were situations presented themselves that allowed us to have an artistic conversation, a public artistic conversation and experience that resulted in something that was shown to the world. So we had this collaboration, and it was through an artistic collaborations that we developed friendships. And so I became very close to both of those groups, socially, I mean, that came out of the artistic part. And then that developed, that social contact and that friendship became so strong that we decided to embark on a kind of a business relationship in co-producing the festival, as with a local producer and the IBMF, from where we were, just kind of working together. The local producers really taking the lead um, in what was going to happen, because I never wanted to replicate what we were doing in the Bay Area all over the world. Just like I didn't want to have it centered here and everyone would have to come to us. I didn't want it to be US centric. I really wanted to be relevant to local audiences. That's really key. And to always mix contemporary and traditional styles and always have an educational component that involves children and families. So, these were kind of the guidelines that I felt were really important and that we managed to do in all these festivals in different places. So I just love the kind of the evolution of that it went from artistic to social to business. And it's really worked well. I mean, we've managed to produce this festival in so many places with relatively little money. It's been just the passion of the people who want to make it happen that has made it happen. And there's something about power and strength in that kind of foundation that is much stronger than simply, we got a big grant to do this.
Absolutely. Or yes, waiting only for when the money will come in order
Right,
to do what you
right.
want.
I feel like it has very strong roots, how the foundation worked
Yes, in
so
the
well. I feel
values
like it
and
gave us
yeah,
very strong roots to continue.
absolutely. Yeah, there is an underlying ethic that goes there, um, that then is able to you're able to share what you're doing not only in the body practice way but in the way you would like to work professionally with everyone. So it
Right, right. And it's allowed us to produce in all these amazing places. I mean,
Mhm.
it's quite an impressive list internationally. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And within this short history and the way that you started developing it, when does the educational component go in? When do you start seeing that this is a great tool for education?
Very early on,
Mm.
very early on. There kind of from the beginning, there were these two sides. Well, for me, it grew out of the artistic first, but almost immediately I started being asked to teach workshops. Um, And this was in the context of touring, usually at universities and civic centers and these kinds of situations. They'd bring the company in to perform, and they'd see that I was doing body music, and this was really unusual at that time. And people were interested. Oh, will you do this for our dance department? Oh, let's do something for the music department too. The idea kind of spread when people saw what it was. And so uh, very early on, I started teaching the ideas. And there were a lot of ideas coming to me at that time, kind of immediately once I started doing this. It just had the whole mapping thing. And it was like it was always there, just kind of waiting to be unleashed. And so I would say that the educational part came really quickly. And it caused me to start thinking in those ways, really, of pedagogical thinking, of okay, how do you get from A to B? And these are dancers, these are musicians, these are completely lay people. How do I approach them differently? What do they need in order to be able to access this form? So it challenged me, to think in those terms, and it was a great challenge. I mean, it really sparked my creative imagination. So I had both the creative and the educational side kind of going on side by side. It was a really exciting time for my brain, to kind of wrap it myself around, what was happening with that, because it unfolded pretty quickly once the window opened.
That makes sense. Yeah, like a intellectual aha moment, and then things
Exactly.
just start flowing.
And then just, that people saw some value in it and started requesting it, in their educational situations.
Yes, because obviously it was probably some that was missing and that was needed. Some kind of merging between this, like you said, the musicians and the dancers and the visual and the acoustic. Because I know
Well,
maybe you could speak a little bit about this because it's not about just applying drum patterns on the body. There's a
right.
whole depth in how you're thinking about it.
Well, I think it's kind of based in the desire to have more rhythmic training, and particularly in the Western world, we don't do that very well. We can see that. We can see that in our dancers and musicians. And just I was in a group of professional musicians recently, and I said, okay, here's a rhythm. Where is the syncopation in this rhythm? And no one could tell me. And these were professional musicians. It took a while. It's almost like they had to see it on the page. I could tell they were trying to see it, in their mind, and then they could tell me where it was. So it's this kind of stuff that I think, wow, we've really kind of missed the point in so many ways. So I think it was this void this lack of rhythmic training in Western music and dance education, that people saw, oh, this could possibly be useful for our dancers. Oh, this could be useful for our musicians. Oh, we could put musicians and dancers together and train them both at the same time, through this form. So I think people saw the value pretty quickly, in those terms. They were
Mhm.
open and wanted it to incorporate it into their educational
Mhm. And it was
pursuits.
probably something achievable, like there were goals, and then you can actually incorporate it quite quickly, let's say, in a way, once you get the language of it.
Exactly. It's very accessible. And then it can be applied,
Mhm.
it's a tool that can be applied to so many situations.
And as a tool, you've managed to work with different specialties with it, even with creating math training for kids.
Right.
Um, so I don't know, could you think about like a couple examples of, yeah, these more, I don't know, less conventional spaces that you have been asked to work in or to develop something?
Yeah, well, the one that you mentioned, the rhythm of math that I developed with Linda Akiyama, um, was certainly kind of opened the window for me, also. Linda was my student. She would come to my monthly classes forever. And she was also a classroom teacher, science and math specialist. She had an arts degree as a dancer and world music, and through the UCLA's World Arts and Cultures program. And so she had these great skills and a great mind, and she would come in and say, "Oh, that thing we did in class last month, well, I took that idea and I tried it with my third graders and it kind of looked like this." And it was like, wow. Linda, I love your mind. Just the way she could transform what I was doing and translate it to something that was really practical and applicable to these young minds. And she was often concentrating. She would go through language skills, but also she really loved math, and so she kind of started concentrating on the math part. And she'd show me, and then it would give me ideas, and I say, "Wow, would you try this idea when you go back next week with them?" We just started kind of going back and forth. And over a period of about 10 years, we ended up writing this book. We didn't know for many years we were writing a book. We were just excited about these ideas. And then word got out and people heard what we were doing. And then people were asking us to do presentations for them. And it just kind of grew organically. Um, and so it became a unit for grades 3 through 5 of teaching mathematical skills using body music. And it addresses the kinesthetic learning for those learners we've ignored for so long. And what we found, it was great success, just amazing success. Kids who had had difficulty learning, traditionally, were getting it. There were so many aha moments. It's like, oh, I get it. It's like, I see it. I hear it. Those kind of comments all the time. And then other kids who had no problems with the mathematical skills suddenly started seeing other things that they had never seen before, like the rhythmic patterns of mathematics. And suddenly they were aware of the sonic or visual rhythms that were available to them in these equations that they had no idea existed before. So they were excited. Everybody in the room was excited for some reason. And so that program really took off, and the book has done well. And unfortunately, Linda passed a couple of years ago, and so she did get to see a lot of the fruits of her labor. And the book is really exists because of her tenacity and kind of keeping me on track. And we managed to pull it off. So that's that's a big one for us in terms of a setting. But I've worked with visual artists. I've worked with other kinds of artists, taking it from movement artists, from sonic artists, visual artists, and taking these ideas of rhythm and then applying it to other ways, other means, other vehicles. And that's pretty exciting too, and allows a lot of students to kind of make that crossover, to make that leap in ways that they hadn't imagined before, or hadn't even imagined that there were connections that they could leap over. Yeah, so those are,
Amazing. Yeah, those are great examples. And I think, and what you're talking about as well is not only this new knowledge language, but it's a tool that helps you access new knowledge. It,
exactly, it's a
which
tool.
is yeah, it takes you somewhere else, which makes it
It does.
endless.
And it is endless because it's only a tool.
Hmm.
I mean, it's more than a tool, but it can be used as a tool to access these other places that may surprise you that you end up with.
Absolutely. Um, I would say that body music relies a lot of on the more of a world music concept on this single beat and the pulse, having a constant awareness of the underlying pulse of a piece of what you're working on, and that this helps a lot with your stability, your consistency in a group, your synchronization, teamwork. Um, I don't know. Is there any element like taking it also to a little bit more therapeutic, well-being, healing environments? Do you see these nuances, these qualities that I don't know, you've noticed during your sessions that really bring people together, either because of this connection of the pulse or any other element, like you said, the social stuff in it? What can you see that is achieved through this approach, let's say, rather than
Mhm.
everyone coming together and playing their musical instrument, for
Right,
example?
right. Well, a few things. I mean, just what you were saying just kind of brought up a few thoughts for me. One is, um, I mean, all those devices, if you will, to call them, like polyrhythms, polymeters, cross pulses, all these rhythmic devices that we can use in body music. We can experience them, we can illustrate them. Um, those are music and dance tools, if you will. But they also metaphorically they speak to other things. Kind of, you alluded to that. I mean, just the idea of polyrhythms, like two rhythms going on simultaneously, and they're different rhythms, but they kind of fit in a certain way. So they create this fabric or a conversation that goes back and forth. So metaphorically, we can use this in so many situations. Um, you know, use it in intercultural communication, and that you have two distinct rhythms going on simultaneously, but they somehow can coexist. And they may have some dissonance in them. They're not necessarily harmonious all the time, but they can coexist. They can fit together. They can lock in a very satisfying result, even though they're different. And we can use this kind of imagery so much for communicate, well, just in so many ways. But the fact that we're doing it with our bodies, I feel like it taps into something that's very deep. We're not using other instruments. We're not, quote, hiding behind other instruments. A very raw kind of exposing kind of experience. And I feel like that alone um, really brings a lot to the surface just to begin with. And if you're working with other people, if those people have that experience as well, then it results in a certain kind of openness that's going on. And that openness can then tap into a much deeper level of emotional content or accessing trauma, or I mean, again, it's a tool that can uh, access so many different kinds of things, depending on what you're after, what you're seeking. um,
Mhm.
and
And it
so
seems like you're exposed in a different way, but you're also in a safe space at the same time, being
yeah,
a group activity in a way.
you are. And I mean, I think it's a lot of that is up to the facilitator to create a very safe space. And that's crucial, if you're trying to get to depth, that everyone feels safe in that space. And yet it's through that safety that you can allow yourself to feel so exposed. And that's where the deep work happens, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Excellent.
So
Mhm.
there, it became a vehicle that we could access this stuff. And I feel like for myself, when I started realizing that, then it took on the therapeutic qualities of, I realized that the reactions I was having in some of my classes, that people were experiencing this on a different level than just, oh, let's go make some music, let's go make some dance, let's have a party, you know, when I turn around after with my back turned to a class of 100 people, and I'm doing something and I'm repeating it over and over, and I turn around and everyone's crying, I realize we've just tapped into something much bigger than us, you know. Um, and I had a few of those glimpses over the years, and then I really started realizing the power of that, and that could be tapped into, that could also be a tool. And so kind of looking more, thinking about it more therapeutically, how do you get to that place where people are safe, but they allow themselves to be vulnerable, that they can experience what's going on? It may be dark, it may be challenging, it may be painful. How do you create and maintain that space so that it's safe, that people can reside there for a while, and
Yeah,
benefit?
you're building the conditions for it, and what are those?
Yeah,
What kind of, yeah.
yeah. So how to maintain that space,
Mm.
and use that space in positive ways,
Mhm.
because and that's a tricky one. It's a tricky
Mhm.
one for me because I'm not trained as a therapist. And I don't sell myself as a therapist. I don't sell my work as therapy. I don't sell my work. I said, I'm going to solve your problems. You know, I do say sometimes that some people have benefited from this. I've benefited in these ways. I can speak on a very personal level, but I don't sell it as a therapeutic means. I think that's probably coming in the future. I mean, there are people, because the work has caught the interest of neurologists and brain scientists, and they have interest in these, and some of them are developing those skills. I see where this is going. It's very exciting. Um, but because I'm not trained in those ways, I do it intuitively, and I think my intuitive skills are pretty good. I mean, just kind of seeing what I've been able to do so far, but I'm always really careful um, about leading people into that space if I don't feel like I can get them back out,
Mhm.
or that I can leave them in a good place, because
Mhm.
I feel like this is crucial, because you can really mess people up. Um, and so I've had these experiences, again, because I'm not a therapist. I don't have the skills to release the onslaught sometimes of not negativity, but the darker sides of things that can be released, that can be accessed through this work. And so sometimes I feel like I absorb that, and sometimes it takes me a few weeks to kind of shed that after a particularly intensive um, experience. I had one of those last fall in Turkey.
Do you
Um,
mean from a participant who got into, like, say, dark mindset from
no, it
participating?
was, and this is kind of not public information, so it's off the record, just because I don't want to get anyone into trouble. But
Absolutely. Do you need to, should I pause the recording? Or do you want to
um,
just give a very general description? I mean, we can skip it, that's
I have
fine.
a very general description in
Okay.
that there was a group of 50 music teachers who met me in Turkey from another country where a revolution was going on. And the participants were kind of traumatized when they arrived, just by was going on at home. And it was through 3 days of body music that I felt like they were able to shed a lot of the trauma that they were experiencing in those days. And I saw it in their bodies. I saw what was released. I saw the change of our initial meeting into the second day and into the third day. And then at the end of the third day, before heading back to the airport and heading home, when we were preparing to leave, I saw it all return. I saw their shoulders roll in. I saw their chest become concave. I saw the look in their eyes. And so it was, again, it was a moment when I realized the power of this work, and that it did give them a little bit of relief. It did give them a few moments of joy during this time. They were able to set this stuff aside for a little bit. But in the process of doing that, in that work, sometimes it would trigger things in the participants, and I'd have to stop and kind of back up, and we'd have to go back in a different way and find our workarounds, these blocks and these painful places that existed, this somatic, this trauma that was stored in their bodies. So, like I say, I'm not a trained therapist, so I'm going purely on intuition in this, and I didn't sell myself as a therapist. When they invited me, I was working with music teachers. Sure, can I come and work with music teachers? Yes. Did I know there was going to be a revolution going on at that time? No, because we set this up, a year in advance. And so suddenly the workshop took on a whole different vibe. It took on a whole different meaning for all of us.
Yes, and you can't predict the emotional state that the participants will be in each time you arrive. So it's you come in and
exactly. And I have to say, in a lot of ways, I still don't have words for this experience. It's still, it's more about feelings. And those feelings are still really strong.
I recently was writing out a recording that I had from kind of like a group session we had with Yotapeklari, who work with blind and deaf people at the same time. It's a mixed group, and one of the people who is visually impaired said, "This is one of the few or the only places where my role changed in a micro society. Let's say I'm used to being always cared for, and always people need to kind of walk on eggshells around me, just so they think that they need to take like over care for me. And this time I had to take care of a person who could not hear me, and I couldn't see them, and I had to show them when we are going to enter the next beat, and I had to lift my shoulders, and I thought she was next to me, and I just went, now, and I gave her this cue without me having to be that, but I know that she needed it. And for the first time, I was a person who was sending the message and not just constantly receiving. And I think people that do feel sometimes in this margin, let's say, it's not always a pleasant thing to need help, and it's not like you appreciate it, and you're going through something, or you're traumatized, and then somebody's giving it to you. But when you are being the one giving back in any kind of way, it's transformative for them. And the fact that this happened in a random body music session, it's kind of crazy, instead of it happening in everyday life or at their home.
Yeah. Well, there's a dependency, there's a dependency that is not always pleasant, when you're the dependent one.
Absolutely.
And to reverse that role, it must have been
Absolutely.
really, really powerful.
Absolutely. And right after, the same person who is very heavily hard of hearing, and we spoke about this cue that the other person gave, then she said, at another one of our sessions, I had to direct the person to come closer to me, and I was clapping using my clap so they could approach me and follow my sound. And then when I needed something to happen a bit faster, I used my voice. And she says, I'm one of these. I'm a deaf person who rarely uses her voice. I'm very ashamed of it. I don't know what it sounds like. I don't want to be exposed. And I had to use it in this safe environment to call him over, and it was so liberating to experiment with using my voice, even though I don't. So,
Wow.
especially with these two elements of visually showing a cue or sonically doing it,
Mhm.
all these
Wow.
nuances would not have been discovered unless we were in this setting.
Wow.
So it gives value to, yeah, the exact environment that you build with what you have, with the art that you have. Um, so yes, I can imagine, in any kind of setting that you come in, there is something going on a bit more collectively, let's say.
Yeah.
Obviously, personal issues are in every classroom or in every situation that you're in, but a bit more of a collective trauma or experience. It can really get to you, and you can see changes, like you said, in the body structures and the body gestures that people have before, during, and after the session.
Yeah. And I mean, just kind of thinking about,
Mm.
I'm combining thoughts here with what you're saying. You could, if you were in a situation where you were playing instruments, you could probably achieve that same thing. However, with the body music, there's something about totally relying on nothing else than your body, your voice, your clap. There's something about that that makes you even more vulnerable. And I think that vulnerability takes us to deeper levels of connection.
Absolutely. Is there a path or like some ideas that you are interested in exploring in the near future in this link of body music and therapy or healing or vulnerability?
Well, I'm just excited by the interest in
Mhm.
this work by neurologists, by brain scientists, people who want to understand better what is going on, how to put those into scientific terms. There are a lot of people out there who are interested in this. I'm contacted regularly by people doing research projects. And what I'm excited about is there's so many different kinds of research projects. It's like from very specific um, situations like working with hearing impaired or visual impaired people to people with MS or a disease, a particular disease or an affliction, something that holds them back. And then there's for stroke recovery, um, which I've had a little bit of experience myself with that, which kind of opened my eyes real wide about the power and the possibilities again for applying this art form in a therapeutic way. So I'm just so excited by the breadth of this, and the implications, um, that it seems to be applicable in so many different situations, environments. So that's what excites me there right now. It's like an explosion of awareness of, oh, this might be really useful for fill in the blank.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I would close by saying that the fact that you have been so open in sharing it has allowed people to explore it in different ways and to make it their own in a way and take it further and then reach back to you and collaborate and do all these things. It's from coming, like you said, from this openness and sharing and mapping and traveling it around, um, instead of keeping it strictly behind closed doors with very strict, let's say, copyright issues or things like that. It has been something that you have, you acknowledge the influence of it, where it came, and you're becoming an influence for others. And I think that, like we said about this value and ethics system that went throughout the festival, and all these things are really tied together. Nothing is separate. It's part of a thread, and these real fruits of years and years of openness and labor that has really been in a sharing environment and honest environment.
Hmm,
That's
cool.
that's impressive. Yeah, I think it's cool. Great. Well, thank you so much for this. This was really,
Well,
really insightful.
I hope it was useful.
It was, and I think there's a lot more to be done. Like it's like you said, things are happening in this
It
direction.
is. It is. It's very exciting where we're at right now.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
in those three ways: the performance, the educational, and the therapeutic.
Mhm.
I feel like they're all just kind of blasting off
Mhm.
uh, in really exciting and surprising ways. You know,
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Keith.
you're so welcome.
This was amazing.